May 23rd, 2020. So, the Foliar feed pump that I just bought new last year failed over the winter. I had it here in the greenhouse. I was actually using it to run the greenhouse shower at high volume so I could take nice long hot showers here in the greenhouse over the winter, which feels fantastic. And that's water is heated by wood. It runs through a coil here in the thermal mass pot and pumps from this tank. But anyway, so that pump failed over the winter, which is quite frustrating because that was a $300 some Flojet pump, and I didn't want to spend another $300 for a pump that's going to fail in such a short period of time. I think part of that was my fault. There was some pressure on the fittings that I probably should have set up a little more relief on it. So I'll just show you the pump quick. So one of the seals on the pump went, and it leaked, and it ended up leaking down into the motor and made quite a rusty mess. And I probably could rebuild that, but I just don't have time to mess with it. And at the end of the day, my Foliar pump has to work when I need it. I can't go out to do a Foliar feed and then find myself spending 3 hours messing around with the pump. So I'm just replacing it, and I went to a different pump manufacturer, and I got this from Northern Tool and Hydraulics. Okay, the old pump I did not get from Northern Tool and Hydraulics. The new pump I got from Northern Tool and Hydraulics, and it's basically a replica of the Flojet, but this pump is only about 160 bucks. I say only, that's still quite pricey, but it produces the old Flojet is 4.9 gallons a minute and rated to 45 psi at 12 volts and 14 amps. And this new pump is rated to 60 psi at 5.5 gallons a minute. Also runs on 12 volts, but it takes a max amperage of 17. It's a little bit beefier pump. It produces a little more pressure and volume, and as we're scaling up here, that's not going to be a bad thing. The other cool thing about this pump is it comes with a full manual and an exploded view diagram, so if you have a problem you can actually take it apart and work on it. The old Flojet pump did not. In fact, let me show you that quick. Not only does it not come with a manual, but in order to prevent you from doing your own service on it, they actually did tack welds on this casing so you couldn't get it apart. So I had to take the grinder and grind off those tack welds so I could even open the pump up to have a look inside of it. And if you know me, nothing ticks me off more than making a piece of equipment that I can't work on myself. So, all that aside, out with the old, in with the new. In addition, while I'm doing this, I thought I would set this up for a little bit better operation this year. So I'll just explain real quickly how this works. This is a disc filter. If you are not familiar with disc filters, I'll put a link here in the video. Go check out my video on disc filters. They're a great filter, and they clean out really easily, much easier than a screen filter. So this is a diaphragm pump, so you don't want to take all sorts of sand and sediment into the pump because that can screw up the diaphragm. So I put a disc filter in front of the intake, and that prevents sediment from getting into it. I use Foliar feeds that have some very fine rock minerals in them, and sometimes there are some larger pieces of sediment. You don't want that in the pump, so the disc filter prevents that from getting into the pump. So this is the suction side of the pump, and this was the old plenum that came over from the suction and went into the pump. And that old pump had quick connects. The new pump has threaded fittings. These are 1/2 inch national pipe thread fittings. And so I had to go get new fittings, and I figured while I'm getting new fittings, let's replace all this sort of cob-jobby clamps and connectors, because these have been a hassle for some time. So went down to Williams, picked up some parts. Oh yeah. So we're going to put in some solid plastic piping in here and get it fixed up. So we're just going to change our intake and output. We're going to get rid of all this clamp stuff and go over to solid plastic pipe fittings. So we can do foliar feeds efficiently and effectively without any hassle. Because when that season comes, it's about every 7 days I go out and do a foliar feed, and I'm covering quite a bit of square footage, so I need to be able to do that efficiently and effectively. I'm at a scale at this point where watering cans are way too slow. I would spend all night doing that. As it stands, usually by the time I get done feeding all the crops here on the farm, it's a good 2 or 3 hours of you know, making up custom foliar feeds for each crop and applying them. And so I want that to be an efficient action. So along with this pump, did not come with the pump, but for another 20 bucks, there was this nice power connector set up. It plugs right into the power feed on the pump, and it comes with battery clamps. That's really nice, and there's an onboard switch so I can turn on and off the master power to the pump. So I figure for 20 bucks, that'll save me some screwing around. Used to just kind of wrap the wires around the battery terminals, and that worked okay, but I'd rather just get on with business and upgrade to more professional operations. This pump also has a pressure switch on it, which is very handy. So that means that once you get the pump hooked up and running and primed up, you can basically you know, move to whatever location you want, and then when you want water, you just hit the trigger on the nozzle and you get water or foliar feed or whatever you're spraying on demand. And then when you let off the nozzle, the pressure accumulates and the switch trips the pump off so you don't damage the pump or burn out the motor. So I'm just going to assemble this plenum here quickly, and then I'll give you a shot of that. Yeah, so one other thing I meant to mention here is this plenum comes out of the pump, and you'll notice there's 2 valves on here. One is to the output, the garden hose adapter on here, and I use this yellow garden hose, which I know looks like it's in horrible shape at the moment, but I use that as my foliar feed line, so I can just drag out and spray where I want easily. And then the other side of this, there's a valve here also. This goes back into the foliar barrel. I use a 15-gallon plastic barrel to mix my foliar feeds in, and so that's really handy when you're filling the barrel and making your first when you start mixing the foliar feed up. So what I do is I shut the output off and I turn this recycle valve on, and so the pump spins the fluid in the tank over and basically mixes the foliar feed up for me to make sure that we have nice uniformity. You don't want to distribute foliar feeds unevenly. You want them even, and you want your concentration to stay even. So I use that on the initial mix-up, and also if I'm going between one crop and another, I'll flip it back to that and let it recirculate while I move from one location to another. Alrighty, pretty much all set. Got one little issue. This valve did not want to thread upright, so I may end up replacing that valve because it kept trying to cross thread on this plastic pipe, and I think it's still a little cross threaded, which triggers my plumbing OCD a bit. So I don't know, we'll see. I'm not going to test this tonight because I'm just not really set up to test it. If that does end up leaking, I don't want to end up getting the pump or the motor wet, or getting something else wet. I don't intend to. But basically that's it. You can see I traded this out for that, and I think this cost me about the same, or maybe even a little less than this setup did, because these clamps I think are $2.50 or $3 a piece, so they're pretty expensive, those stainless clamps. And now that frees all those clamps up for ram pump, ram line repairs and that sort of thing. There's a few fittings coming up the ram line, delivery line, that need to be replaced, or need to be clamped. They've been replaced, but they need to be clamped. So I probably will use those now that they're liberated stainless steel clamps. We love them. So anyway, so that's basically it. So you can see the pump does its intake through the filter, and outputs over here, and we can you know, valve it on and off. This, with a less flexibility here, I probably will mount this on a board or something so that we don't end up putting tension on these fittings again. But for now, it's assembled and ready to go. And all I got to do to power it up is plug into the nice connector on it here, if I can find it. There it is. Plug these two together. Bing, bing. Clamp onto my battery, flip the switch on, and I'm ready to rock. We got the nutrients are here. They came Wednesday or Thursday? No, Thursday. They came Thursday, and so we're ready to rock and roll for the season. And warm weather's here, and it's time to rock and roll. For anyone else who ends up wanting to work on something like this, I will actually share a link to the pump below and the switch and the fittings you're going to have to get yourself at your local hardware store or order online. And these are the only tools that I needed. I always use Teflon tape on threaded fittings. I just like to make sure that they're not going to leak. Sometimes the threads aren't cut quite as precisely as I would like, and you end up with a little bit of a seep leak. And you don't want any leaks on foliar feed. You know, if you leak $5 or $10 worth of product because you like leave the pump on and walk off to look at a plant or something, you come back and find half your tank is gone. A, you've wasted your nutrient, and B, now it's all in one spot in the ground, and that's going to screw up that spot in the ground as well. So that's why I do that. I'm very careful about not having leaks with foliar feeds. So anyway, just a ratchet with a 5/16 socket on it. These are my cutters. These are great for cutting tubing like this. These fittings don't come out of this garden hose very well, and I didn't want to spend all night screwing with it, so I just cut it clean and put new fitting in. A couple of channel locks and some Teflon tape. So I hope you found this interesting or informative. And if you want to know more about foliar feeds, check out my playlist, Introduction to Foliar Feeds, and I'll get into that more throughout this season probably. That's it for now. Thanks for watching the Pharmacy Seeds Network.